What's up, literal players? Welcome to another Whatcast Hot Takes video. This time we're taking a look at the Universal cards that are available in the new Magore's Fiends expansion for Warhammer Underworlds Shadespire. Now, previously we've looked at the unique factional cards that come in the set. This time we're looking at the Universal cards, and this is a part that always excites me about one of these new sets because it affects the entire meta. Now, as always, the Hot Take series is no research done ahead of time. It's just me looking at the cards and giving out my initial opinions or hot takes. Most of what I say may turn out to be wrong as the meta evolves, but this is just educated guessing for fun, and hopefully to get a leg up on the meta as it develops. Now, previously to this, we looked at the universal objectives that are available in the Farsighters expansion. They were really great, so I am super excited to move into Magore's Fiends, and I'm expecting some really great cards for this. Let's get started. Okay, accept inevitability. Score this in the third end phase if all of your fighters are out of action. What? What? Uh, is this some kind of a joke? GW, are you playing with me? What are you doing, GW? Oh, maybe I read it wrong. Score this in the third end phase, okay, if all of your fighters are out of action for one glory point. Okay. Uh, hmm. Wow. 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 Okay, so, potential uses of this card. What? Wow. I feel like they should have called it consolation prize. Um, I'm struggling to find a situation in which this would actually be useful. Um, let's look at all of the problems with it. Problem number one: it's a third in phase card, which means that it is useless for 2/3 of the game. Uh, it awards one glory point for a third in phase card. And finally, it gives you one glory point for losing the game. I feel like they should have called this consolation prize. Um, okay, so I could see playing this if you're really bad at Shadespire. I could see playing this if maybe you're playing a Corn's Champion deck, built around getting going for the Corn's Champion objective, and have this just in case you don't manage to pull it off and your one guy gets killed. But that being said, I mean, in Corn's Champion, you're already spending 1/3 in phase slot on Corn's Champion. You're probably also going to go for Annihilation or one of its variants. Why then would you want yet another third in phase card? I don't know. Maybe at some point in the future, there's going to be some sort of weird gotcha play style built around getting all of your guys killed, but it doesn't exist right now. And I can't even call this card a trap, because for it to be a trap, it has to seem good at the beginning. There has to be bait, and this is just crap. Uh, I challenge anybody watching this. Um, please find me a situation in which this card is useful. I I would love to see it. This is one of those situations where I will gladly eat my words, just because I will be incredibly impressed to find somebody building a workable strategy out of this card. I'm just gonna let's get that out of here. Alright, let's find something to wash a taste out of our mouth. Not a great start so far. Chosen Champion. Score this in and end phase if a surviving friendly fighter has 3 or more upgrades. Okay, so this is definitely built for your Voltron type of deck, where you want to just stack all of your upgrades on a single person. I've spoken about this before. I generally don't think a Voltron deck is a good idea, because you are quite literally putting all of your eggs in one basket. And there is too much in the meta right now to penalize somebody for depending entirely on a single heavily upgraded character. Now, that being said, you don't have to go for a Voltron build to end up with 3 or more upgrades on the same character. Keep in mind, you've got 10 upgrades in that deck at least. And if you are playing a low model count faction, for example, Stormcast, or Blood Warriors or Orcs, it's very likely that you can kind of naturally complete the conditions for this card. That being said, I don't like that it's reasonably difficult to pull off in-phase card that takes a lot of resource to actually accomplish, and you only get 1 glory point. On top of that, I don't really think that it necessarily synergizes that well with much in the game. So yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, I give it about a 4, maybe. I don't see myself using it. It's still not as bad as that first one, though, which it's going to be hard for me to stop thinking about that because I am genuinely perplexed by it. Heroic Feat. A single heroic feat can turn the tide of battle. Well, good for you. Score this immediately if a friendly fighter's attack action succeeds when their target has 2 or more supporting fighters more than the attacker. Okay. Things I like about this card. It's a score immediately. Love those. It's a score immediately for 2 glory. Super love those. And it is at least partially based on an action that you have control over. That being said, downsides. This is also dependent on your opponent doing something. In this case, having a situation in which you have 3 of your opponent's fighters in a line. If you're playing against Stormcast, this is actually pretty common, but against anybody else, it's going to be hard for you to engineer that. I mean, once they set 3 guys together, then they create a pocket that you can charge into and hopefully hit just for the sake of accomplishing this objective. But if you don't completely win that particular attack and probably kill something, you are going to lose a guy because that guy is going to be completely surrounded, essentially. I could see this synergizing well with Mighty Strike, or I'm sorry, Mighty Swing. For example, if you're doing a Sake Bomb, where you charge in against 3 enemy fighters, only one of those hits has to succeed. So you have 3 times the chance to actually pull that off. That's actually, now that I think about that, that's pretty good. If nothing else, just for that particular combo. Interestingly, I think this is a copy of a card, and I don't remember it offhand, of an objective card that we saw in one of these expansions just recently. So you could double up on it if this is something that you really dig using. And that's also good for doing combos because you are at least, I mean, you're 100% more likely to get that part of it in your hand. This does actually synergize well with a few cards that will reward you for uh, succeeding in an attack when you have a varying level of support. Um, but there's not too many cards like that. That being said, I don't know. I kind of feel like this card can stand on its own. Um, I'd give it a 6 or even a 7. Again, depending on your deck, it's very situational, and it's going to depend on what your specific strategy and deck build is. Um, Man, I'm still salty about Accept Inevitability, which I think is coloring my view of all of these other cards. Man, that card. Excuse me. Killing Ground. Score this in an end phase if at least one fighter was taken out of action in the preceding action phase in enemy territory, in your territory, and in no one's territory. Okay. So, alright, taking out someone in the enemy territory is pretty easy. Um, this would synergize well with the score immediately cards for taking out someone in enemy territory and in your territory. Um, the no one's territory part might be difficult, but keep in mind that this will also trigger off of your fighters being killed and not necessarily your opponents. Um, so if you're perhaps playing um, Sepulchral Guard or Skaven or Blood Reavers, you could actually suicide one of your guys in on the line or in any other of these territory conditions, especially so many one damage cards that are in the meta right now. You could intentionally kill your own guy. Uh, but what this card really speaks to me about is we're starting to see a lot more uh, parity between the levels of glory you can get for pure objective builds in aggressive decks. For example, early on when the Skaven came out and people didn't really know how to counter them, there were situations where people would score 20 or 30 glory points a game because the objective cards were such high levels of glory. Now, between all of the score immediately, which are usually violence based, and this card, which is kind of like a supremacy but for murder, we're starting to see aggressive non-objective playstyles kind of catch back up in usefulness. So yeah, I the more I look at this card, the more I like it. It's hard to pull off, but it's any end phase and it's 3 glory points, which makes it worth making this kind of the basis of your strategy or one of your strategies. Massive Assault. Score this immediately if your fighters deal 7 or more damage in an action phase. Damage in excess of a fighter's wounds characteristic is included. Okay. That's not out of the question. I mean, it's a pretty standard score immediately, 1 glory point, which I love those. Um, it can be any of your fighters in the action phase, and overkill counts. So, I mean, if you have a lot of big hits in your army, um, for example, if you're playing Stormcast Liberators, or you're playing Blood Warriors, Orcs, Fire Slayers, um, I mean, 7 or more is not that hard to achieve. That's 1 good hit from Fuel Grimnir and 1 good hit from Tefk, for example. Or, Gurzag and 2 Inspired Orcs. Yeah, I like it. It goes right in with that aggressive play style that I had mentioned before. Um, the downside of this card is if you're dealing 7 damage, and you're doing overkill, you're wasting damage potential, which means you're playing it efficiently. If you're not doing overkill and you're doing just enough, um, then by the time you've done 7 damage, you've probably killed 2 or 3 members of your enemy's warband, and uh, and if you're playing something other or playing against something other than Sepulchral Guard or Skaven, you've probably already won by that point. Master Stroke. Score this immediately if an enemy fighter is taken out of action by an attack action made as a reaction by your warband, or a reaction made by your warband that causes damage. It's really wordy verbiage, but I'm already getting a lot of ideas from this. Right off the bat, score immediately, 1 glory, love it. Okay, so attack action. If a fighter is taken out of action by an attack action made as a reaction by your warband, or a reaction made by your warband that causes damage. Now, naturally, you might think of Gore Fists on Blood Warriors, or perhaps Angerhad Bright Shield's counterattack, or Severin Steelheart's Furious Riposte. And yeah, that's definitely what you're originally supposed to be thinking of. But if you go deeper, there's a lot of attack actions that are done as reactions. For example, I believe a lot of the orc abilities that give you out of sequence attacks are based on reactions. Also, reactions are things like Trap or Twist the Knife if you're playing perhaps Skaven or something like that. There's actually a lot of reactions that can cause enough damage to theoretically take somebody out, and that makes this really a pretty easy 1 glory score immediately objective to get. I think this is one of the better ones we've seen so far in this set, and almost makes me forget about the absolute trash that was Accept Inevitability. Alright, Multiple Fronts. Score this in an end phase if your warband dealt damage to 3 or more enemy fighters in the preceding action phase. Okay. Alright, so this is score in an end phase but get 1 glory point, which I'm not a huge fan of in general. And the cards, I believe that there are easier ways to get 1 glory point out of an end phase. The major problem here, unless you're playing something that has a lot of chaff, for example, Sepulchral Guard, Blood Reavers, Spikeclaw Swarm, dealing damage to 3 or more enemy fighters is very inefficient play, because in theory you want to focus down one enemy until it's dead. Otherwise, you're just putting damage tokens on cards and not really accomplishing anything. Now, this does bring up a couple of possible FAQ questions, which I think is going to take GW looking at. So, if your warband deals damage to 3 or more enemy fighters in the preceding action phase, if I play a ploy, is that considered my warband dealing damage? I would say no, but I mean, keep in mind we have Shardgale. If I play Shardgale, everybody takes damage. So does that mean I achieve this objective? Another question is, what constitutes different enemy fighters? For example, if I kill a Sepulchral Guard Petitioner, it gets resurrected and then I kill it again. Does that count as 2 or 1? I'd be interested to see what GW says about this, and I mean, offhandedly, I do kind of feel like GW would be a little bit more timely with their FAQs for Shadespire. They're very timely, don't get me wrong. I just wish that they would be more timely, and I also wish that they would not make cards like Accept Inevitability. Moving right along. Poised to Strike. Score this in an end phase if at least 3 friendly fighters are adjacent to the same enemy fighter. In phase, 1 glory point, already bad. I do like the idea of ganging up on a single enemy with 3 or more of your friendly fighters. However, the fact that this is an end phase necessarily means that, yeah, you've stacked all those guys up on that enemy fighter, but you have not killed that enemy fighter, which means that enemy fighter is probably a massive threat, and you haven't really accomplished anything other than this 1 glory point. That enemy fighter is probably going to turn around and still be a problem for you. In fact, you might end up, because you're probably doing this with chaff, you might end up unwittingly feeding your opponent glory points, because that enemy fighter that you've ganged up on is probably one of their better ones. It can just stand there and spend 4 activations attacking, which means they're going to get the most possible use out of their best unit. Not a great card, in my opinion. Yeah, I think if I'm going to walk into a trap like that, I want more than 1 glory point out of it. Okay, Pure Carnage. Score this in the 3rd end phase if 7 or more fighters are out of action. Okay, so there are a number of matchups in which this is going to be impossible. For example, Stormcast versus other Stormcast. Any mirror match involving Stormcast. But that being said, any other faction could theoretically pull it off. And if you are playing as Sepulchral Guard or Spiteclaw Swarm, this becomes a lot more possible. I'm curious as to see whether or not GW will rule that a resurrected fighter that is killed again counts as more. I believe they've said when it comes to Blood Reaver Inspire mechanics that resurrecting somebody counts as, or that counts as a new fighter for the purposes of the kill count. So this is theoretically useful for them, but again, that would be based around you intentionally getting your guys killed. And while apparently they seem to be creating that particular type of playstyle for one reason, I don't like it. I'm not going to try to do that. I want to keep my guys alive so that they can do more violence. Khorne may not care from whence the blood flows, but I do. And if nothing else, the fact that this could theoretically synergize with Accept Inevitability makes me hate this card. Victory after victory. Score this in an end phase if you scored 3 or more other objective cards in this round. Okay. There are now a lot of cards that let you get nice bumps of glory points for scoring multiple objective cards. And this is really simple to pull off if you stack your deck with the smaller objectives that are very easy to pull off, or especially if you have score immediately cards. And as a matter of fact, to really have a chance at this, you would definitely need either 3 or a whole deck full of easy to accomplish victory conditions. Because you're only going to get 3 in your hand unless you've really stacked score immediately cards. There are several cards built around getting bonuses for scoring a lot of objective cards. Um, so I could see a pretty strong objective deck that was all score immediatelys, and then all of these cards that are based on, oh, congratulations, you scored X number of objective cards, here's even more glory points. So yeah, it's pretty good. I would definitely caution people not to overcommit to this type of strategy, uh, because score immediately cards are actually sometimes a little tricky to pull off. All right, War of Attrition. Score this in an end phase if the same number of fighters, at least one, from each warband are out of action. Okay, so yeah, I mean this sounds a lot trickier to pull off than it actually is. It's very common to trade casualties in the first activation phase or in the first action phase, or even in the second, especially if you are playing kind of cagey, playing defensive, and just feeding one to your enemy. The problem is it's going to be it's going to be a little bit difficult sometimes to maintain equality in the number of kills. This would synergize pretty nicely with It Begins. Uh, but again, it's theoretically a tricky card to pull off, and it's an end phase for one, so it's okay. It's also based on intentionally, or maybe not intentionally, but it's based on losing somebody out of your faction, which I don't like. Again, I don't like getting my guys killed, even though I play aggressively. I mean, I know it's going to happen, but I do try to avoid it. Um, it's not as bad as Accept Inevitability, however, which is the worst card I've ever seen, ever. Okay, and that's the last of them. So, this one was kind of a mixed bag. We saw some very good ones. We saw some very situational objectives, and we saw one absolute piece of crap, which is called Accept Inevitability, in case you forgot how I felt about that particular card, which is to say, not great. Um, but all that being said, it's a nice spread. I think it actually reinforces some burgeoning strategies that were coming up in the meta. And I always like when these new expansions come out to look through the universal objective cards to see playstyles kind of get born and get dangled out there as possibilities for us, the players, by Games Workshop. Uh, with the exception of Accept Inevitability, which is awful. I feel like that's Games Workshop playing a joke. Again, please tell me I'm wrong and convince me that I'm wrong. I would love to see somebody turn that goose into gold. Uh, and, in general, if you have any differing opinions or you just like to share your own thoughts, please do so in the comments below. As always, please like, share, and subscribe to this video and this channel, and so that we can bring you more Warhammer Underworlds content. Until the next video, have a good one. Oh, and Accept Inevitability sucks.